the permitted zone. At that time, then after deciding that, the committee also decided that it wanted to explore whether premises could relocate from inside to within another premises inside. So was that
in March 2016?
Yes, I believe so.
So there's just been lots of little steps. Why didn't we wrap this all up in one consultation, one package? Why have we spent the money to go up 3 times?
So it was only after doing the initial public consultation and deciding on one of the options that the committee then decided it wanted to explore a further change to the policy.
Who in the committee?
I beg your pardon?
Who in the committee drove these 3 steps? There's been 3 steps where we have eroded away at our sinking lid policy, which was never a true sinking lid policy. And who's driven us through to come back 3 times to slowly erode the policy over the last...
So, look, Councillor King, I have a sense that we need to get some information for this. We've still got a submitter here and we've got 1, 2, 3 more submissions to go. So let's stick with the hearings process and come back to your question.
My question's to the General Manager.
Yes, yes it is, but we are in hearings process. I understand your question and we'll make sure that we can get some information for you.
Hang on, the General Manager was still talking. He still had information to feed out, and that information...
But the last I checked, Councillor King, I'm chairing this meeting and we do have a formal process for submitters and they are here to talk to us, and let's get that out of the way and ask questions of them because they're giving their time, and then we will come back to your question. We're just asking you to park it. So do you have any other questions for Eru, please?
Yes, I do. I need to come back, but it's difficult when I haven't got the information, and I don't appreciate the
there's a whole
line of
trail
questions being shut down when it gets a little bit uncomfortable.
No, I'm trying to manage a process, but Councillor King, there's a whole process and all of the information and minutes you can follow back. The staff have referenced in this report exactly how we got to this decision. So
I understand
we will
exactly
how
we got to this decision.
Well,
what I'm trying to do is inform the other people around this table and the public
and we will do
of
that
how we ended up getting here by
the
little
submission
steps.
Process. So ask your questions of the submitter, please.
Okay, so one of your comments was that you inferred that we've got to a stage where we almost haven't got a sinking lid policy anymore. I presume that's because we've slowly chipped away and eroded away at what we had, which was never a true sinking lid in the first place. Would you agree that we still have a form of sinking lid now, and that by taking this away, we're taking away the last piece of any sinking lid policy which we could have had over the process of the 3 steps?
I certainly think that a true sinking lid is that when a venue closes, and that's because of their own reason, whether it be lack of financial, and I think it was commented earlier about what the primary activities were, whether it was gambling or other activities. A true sinking lid is when they close that they can't open anywhere at all within the district. And that is what we always will push for as an organisation. Throughout this period of time, over the consultation hearings and so forth, we always get disappointed when we don't get that. But we will continue to come back at every submission hearing, and that's what we'll push for. Hopefully systems will be strong enough that we can bring data and people that can produce data, like the police, for instance, around domestic violence, who are reluctant to bring anecdotal evidence because they don't capture data.
So would you agree that we still have a form of sinking lid now, albeit weak? It is still a form of sinking lid?
A very weak one, yes.
Thank you.
Right, are there any further questions? No, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today, Edu. Right, the third submitter is Dr. Richard Wall, and he is from Population Health Waikato. Committee members, this is submission number 13 on page 35. Welcome, Richard. You're familiar with our processes?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so my name's Richard Wall. I'm one of the medical officers of health with Population Health. One of the roles of population health is to try and improve the health as much as possible of the population of the area, and but actually it's council who has a better ability to do that in some ways, because they can work on the environment to create environments that are healthy for people, and to try and make it harder for people to have access to things that might not be so good for their health. So that's why, and certainly this policy is one of those areas where there's a potential to make things a little bit harder for people to have access to gambling machines that can be bad for people's health. So that's why we would like to have a true sinking lid policy, and certainly would oppose any further relocation allowances. We know that there's already that there are a lot of electronic gaming machines within the city already, and on a number of venues, and quite a large spend in that. And we know that there's a lot of harm from gambling, and we talk a lot about problem gamblers, but I just want to expand on that there is a lot further harm than just the problem gambler, that there's people who are considered moderate or low risk gamblers who have some of the issues that problem gamblers had and are likely to become problem gamblers or at risk of that in the future. And there are those who have much less harm, but still some form of harm, the people around the problem gamblers or those who gamble, leading to arguments or people going without things because of loss of money. And so the figures up here are for all forms of gambling, not just electronic gaming machines, but electronic gaming machines do make a particular problem for harm. And we see that in Hamilton, 28,000 people can be negatively impacted by gambling, which is something to have if we want to have a healthy city that people love living in, and that's not something that we'd want. There are inequalities in gambling. We see high rates in Maori and Pacific and lower socioeconomic groups, that we think that the best way of addressing that is by having a sinking lid, by reducing the access to gaming machines. Skip over that. And does it work? Well, we know that gambling behaviour is very complex, and there's a whole lot of things that come together that lead to problem gambling and lead to participation in gambling, but there is support in the evidence to suggest that reducing number of gambling machines does reduce the level of harm. And so there's been a meta-analysis of studies within Australia and New Zealand, and that's a good form of study, and that it looks at data from a range of sources rather than just individual data points. And that's shown the clear link between problem gambling prevalence and the number of electronic gaming machines, which certainly suggests, and the authors agree, that a reduction could be a useful policy to reducing harm. From that, then, in conclusion, we recognise that gambling behaviour is complex. I haven't really talked about funding coming back into the community from gaming machines, but while that can be a beneficial thing, we certainly think that the harm caused by these gaming machines is much greater than any benefit that could come from that. And so, just to finish, then, we do ask council not to add any further relocation ability. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Richard. Could you go back to about your second slide? You had there's a 24/7 thing there. Yeah, the one before that.
Oh, before that.
No, yeah. I'm not aware. I don't electronic machine gamble, so I don't know. But what are you talking about? 24-hour gambling?
Yeah, actually, these slides were put together for me by somebody else, so I'm not sure. I mean, this is what I was told, that there is access, but I can't confirm that myself, actually, that there is.
Okay, and I don't want to be too rude, but
Casino.
Oh, right, which
okay,
doesn't.
We're not
talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, with all due respect, your group came to us last time and submitted and gave us some really, really misleading information about secret shopping about gambling. Some work people had done. It was, and yeah, with all due respect, and I know you're doing it for the right reasons, well, what you believe to be the right reasons, but this is the second time your information has been patchy, to be.
Well,
I mean, we're relying on people like you to give us expert evidence, objective, honest evidence, and this is the second time that the information,
as you say, is incorrect for what we're looking at, but it's not incorrect overall. So I apologise that it is not what we're looking at.
Yeah. I mean, it's a credibility thing, isn't it?
But as I say, My point was from the slide that there is a lot of access to gaming machines in Hamilton, and I don't think that's an incorrect statement to say that.
Okay, but you'd accept that the extent of 24 gambling opportunity is not within the context of what we're discussing here. We're talking about...
Yeah, as I say, I just don't have that information because I didn't put the wording on the slide, but I certainly accept your point that if that's the case, then
that was a similar excuse to what we got last time too. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Young?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Ward.
Oh, no, he had his hand up earlier. Sorry.
I just want to ask for that number, 443 poker machine, does that include what's in the casino as well? Or?
It will do, yeah, I
It's
believe.
included,
Yeah, so that...
Do you have a number of...
No, sorry, it doesn't.
Sorry, hang on.
Well, it's
That's
Richard's
on top of
evidence.
that.
That's what I'm...
Dave, it's Richard's evidence.
Ask your question
is it,
again.
the poker machine within the casino, is it part of that 443 or?
Okay, well, I'm going to have to plead ignorance because I just wanted to... My point was that there were a lot of poker machines, and as I say, I didn't collect the data myself, so I don't have that information. Sorry.
Okay, second question. Can you name some of the social issues that connected or related to problem gambling? Like, for example, domestic violence or anything else?
Yeah, so problem gambling that is defined by by different surveys, so it's defined in different ways by different people, but usually it looks at people who do have problems where they can't stop themselves going back to gamble more. They end up spending more money than that they would like, and that to get that money they might end up borrowing or selling things that they own, which could also come from crime or from fraud. They experience feelings of guilt, they might be being criticised by others. These are the kind of questions that are asked to define somebody who's a problem gambler in those surveys.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson?
Yes, I'd just like to say to start with that I think it's important that when submitters come and present us evidence, and to this extent I agree with Gary, that the evidence is accurate and that it's a bit like the border control program where you're asked if you packed your own bags. If someone else has packed them, you're still responsible. And I think you, as a submitter, are responsible for what you tell us here. And to that extent, I think Gary has made a good point. The 24-hour gambling opportunities legally relate only to the casino, perhaps, not to the Class 4 pokey gambling, which is limited to the hours of operations of the pubs and clubs that they're in. And the 443 pokey machines are Class 4 pokey machines, not the casino pokey machines, which are over and above and we can't touch and have never been able to touch. Only the government can. And you know, it's in order for us to accept the evidence that we're given, we need to be confident in it. And again, I agree with Gary on that point. And I come from a diametrically opposed viewpoint on all of this, probably from Gary. But it's
Excuse me,
important.
you're
So your
presupposing
question,
you know what...
Gary,
Well-
let him finish.
Yeah, I am Gary. Am I right?
So your questions.
When you basically though are talking about your general argument.
Mike, you need it
Sorry.
down.
It gets in the way for me waving my arms around. When you talk, Richard, when you're talking about the subject generally, you're essentially saying pokie machine gambling is unhealthy. It causes harm in a health sense.
That's, well, I guess I better be very careful with my wording. So not for everybody, but certainly for some people that it can be.
Okay, so in a population sense, it does do it.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Have you, the DHB that you're speaking on behalf of today, or the population health element, have you made these submissions to central government? Not you personally, but...
Not me personally, not that I'm aware of, no.
I have to ask why that would be not be the case, given if you think it's harmful, and I certainly know other similar organisations and other DHBs have made similar comments. The government has required us to have a policy that allows for some of this gambling that causes harm in some circumstances. And I sort of am asking myself, why is it the council being hit up by a government-funded organisation when the government itself requires us to have this policy? Not the first area that this has happened either. I mean, maybe that's a rhetorical question. I don't know whether you'd like to comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's much that I can comment on it. I'm not sure why we haven't done that, but I take your point.
You'd be happy, though, if we sent your submission to the government and said this is what your local government agency thinks about this area? That's,
yeah,
again,
sure.
a rhetorical question.
question?
I'm not asking you to answer that.
Yeah.
Look, just talking about the relocation aspect, the specific thing here, is there any circumstances under which you think relocation would be okay or justified? I'll give you an example and comment on that, please. If if the new Te Rapa Tavern, let's say, burnt down in an accident, fire, whatever, for whatever reason, burnt down, and they physically set up nearby in a warehouse temporarily while it was being built, should they be, or had to move permanently because the ground underneath was contaminated and was discovered, something like that beyond their control, should they be allowed to move under limited circumstances? Is there any sort of cause you'd see justifiable?
Well, it's our view that the harm caused by these is greater than what might be perceived as unfairness for them not to be able to move. So it's our view that a sinking lid would be what we would want, which would mean that they wouldn't be able to do that. But I understand that could be perceived as unfair, but so could the harm caused by these machines to people.
Okay, thanks. Can I ask, through you, Madam Chair, to the staff, on page 5.91, the description of what we're doing, of this part of the policy that I've just asked a question about, talks about allowing the second sentence of 9.1 down the bottom, near the bottom of page 5. It says inclusion of a new clause to allow any venue within the permitted area to be able to relocate within the gambling permitted area. The way I'm reading that, and sort of relates, I think, to something that we asked Jared earlier, it seems to say if you're in, let's say, the Hamilton East permitted area, you can move somewhere else within the Hamilton East permitted area, but not to some other permitted area. Yet some of the answers I heard earlier implied that you could move to any permitted area, but the wording here is not saying that.
You'd think it would say within
A
gambling permitted area.
Correct. So I'm asking.
Can we clarify that for Councillor McPherson?
Yeah, I mean, so the 4B says where a society undertakes to permanently close an existing Class 4 gambling venue located inside of a gambling permitted area as part of an application.
Sorry, 4B.
Sorry, yeah, we're on.
Sorry.
9.1.
Yeah, so I'm just reading
We're
from
in
the
actual
policy on
policy,
page
so-
8,
Yeah,
4B.
Okay.
so it says gambling
So, yeah, where a society
side
undertakes
A.
to permanently close an existing Class 4 gambling venue located inside of a gambling permitted area as part of an application for new venue consent, and the proposed new Class 4 gambling venue is located within a gambling permitted area outlined in Schedule 1.
Okay.
So
It does say A.
that would say that you could locate from one gambling permitted area to another.
So the wording of
area.
the report is
Is in-
what's incorrect,
yeah.
not there. Thanks. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's helpful. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Tooman.
Yeah, probably not about relocation, but Doctor, you said there was 735 problem gamblers. Is that Hamilton City or population health area?
That's Hamilton City, but just to be clear, that's an estimate based on the fact that 0.7% are considered.
Because the previous submitter, Eric, in his submission, he says that the gambling problem affects 5 to 10 persons, and there's 17,000, he believes, in Hamilton. And according to my calculation, that makes for 2,266 problem gamblers in Hamilton. So it seems to be a huge variance between problem gambling and population health.
I think, there are different ways that this is defined. This has come from the ministry study that looked at it in a particular way to say this is the number of problem gamblers. Often problem gamblers are mixed together with moderate risk gamblers, and the figure is given as one combined thing, so it may be that's, explains some of that discrepancy.
Does the problem gambler in an environment such as pokies machines and that sort of stuff, is somewhat of a controlled environment, would you agree, compared to online gambling?
I don't believe it's particularly controlled, in that when you're sitting at that machine, I mean, there will clearly be some level of control, but it's still a very continuous form of gambling where people get hooked in and they continue on and on.
Of course, online gambling, of course, there's nobody there to monitor what they're doing, is there?
That's true. There have been a study that looked at, in Norway, where they got rid of all the electronic gaming machines in 2007. They didn't find an increase in internet gambling as a result of that, or in other forms of gambling generally. So it's not necessarily going to be a switch from one to another.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. When you first started speaking, you talked about 28,000 people negatively impacted by gambling. And then in your next statement, you said, well, did I hear you correctly when you said, you qualified yourself by saying that you were addressing all forms of gambling, not just poker machines?
So for that figure, it's problem gambling within Hamilton, which isn't just from electronic gaming machines.
And then the credibility of your evidence was challenged on the slide that's up on the wall. The top line of the slide clearly says the size of the gambling opportunity in Hamilton. It doesn't refer to individual machines.
That was my point of the slide, to say that there were a lot of gambling opportunities in Hamilton, and I certainly didn't mean it to be misleading to suggest that it was all from there, but from electronic gaming machines, but clearly that's been perceived by someone. I apologise.
In the top line of what you say there clearly points it out, doesn't it?
I would have thought so, but yes.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Yes, I think as a suggested follow-up, if population health, exercising your due, what I call a statutory independent role, have talked to your colleagues in Wellington, and I'm sure there must have been some interaction with the Ministry and the Minister of Health around these issues. I think that'd be helpful for us to receive. I'd be personally surprised if there hadn't been.
Around the issues of electronic gaming machines.
Absolutely. Well, about problem gambling, as a national health issue. Can you if we just come back to that 1 in 3%, and then the impact on about 30,000 people, 20%, can you just clarify in terms of local evidence, and I'm not sure how much of surveys or it's anecdotal, if that is around people paying the so-called pokies, or dare I say it, and I've observed this personally, a lot of people seem to spend a hell of a lot at the lotto, at the supermarket, and this is just purely a random observation. It seems quite interesting, in terms of budget. And, I'm just trying to get the line of what you would regard as problem. People making perhaps relative to income, unwise budget decisions, all right, which impacts on household spending and opportunities and lifestyle, versus hard stuff that where households go into undue debt and stress.
So that the 28,000 figure includes sort of much lower level harm than that, but which clearly still was an unpleasant experience for people. So the percentage, you're asking for the number that's the more serious side of things.
I'm just trying to work out a kind of indicative line of what you define as serious versus, I guess, harm, still harmful.
Well, I think that any of this is harmful and not something that we would want to have. We don't want to have people going without anything, and we don't want to have people experiencing arguments which can lead to undue stress and potentially lead on to further issues. So I think there's harm from all those areas, and I guess it's what level of harm people are willing to accept in their community from these things, and what numbers of people. So the number who are experiencing that extensive harm might be smaller, but then there's this huge or quite large population of people who are experiencing a lesser form of
Doctor, obviously at this hearing we exercise an open mind, of course we do, but can you just give us some health issues? Because obviously we have another budget called the health budget, right? Mental health, all of that. Can you just give us some idea, you know, from your perspective, of how that might present in terms of use of our health services?
I can't give you figures on that.
But would that be in the mental health area? Is it into...
Look, some of these people will require mental health help, but often these people don't present to that kind of thing, and they're not getting the help they need potentially. I certainly can't give you any figures on how many would present. So, but you know, there can be associated depression, anxiety associated with somebody who might be a problem gambler, and they might present, but not everybody would have those aspects, and problem gambling alone probably wouldn't present to it.
I mean, it's a bit like smoking, right? There's a cessation smoking policy. Eventually, it ends up in terms of high risk of heart, oral, lungs, all of that. Just
Sorry.
let me finish.
Martin, I just want you to use your microphone.
Oh, sorry, gee whiz. Well, I'm so used to
Jump on
another...
me.
I am so used to another chair, not by your name, a slightly higher position in this council
wanna
who
hear you.
interrupts my questions, but not you, Madam Chair. So what I'm trying to just tease, you see what I mean? You have an anti-smoking thing,
Yeah.
but it's obvious things like in terms of increased of heart risk, lungs, you know, the flow on. So I'm just trying to get a feel of where gambling, problem gambling, may hit our health services and hit, budget.
I think you're right that the flow-on is likely to be if we're going to flow on into mental health services, but yeah, how much I can't comment on.
Yeah, so there's not necessarily been the empirical research at a local level. All your studies, it seems to me you're quoting national. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? No, thank you very much
Thank you.
for your submission. Right, we only have two submitters left. The next one is Mr. Tim Wood, and he's from Grassroots Trust. Committee members, this is submission number 14 on page 39. Welcome, Tim. You've got 5 minutes. The bell will ding, and then we've got 5 minutes for questions.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity to come back and have another discussion on this matter. I'll keep my submission quite simple. We are talking about quite a narrow point, which is allowing venues to relocate within the gambling permitted zone. Grassroots Trust is supportive of the amendment to the policy. It makes sense that if a venue can relocate from without the zone into the zone, that venues that are within the zone can move within the zone. We have examples at the moment where venues are required, need to relocate for various reasons. An example currently in the CBT where we have a venue that has a demolition clause on it. The venue will be redeveloped. A bar with gaming machines will no longer be there under that redevelopment, and we would like to relocate those machines. Under the current policy, we can't do that, but we can bring a venue from out of the zone into the CBD. So it makes common sense that that venue should be allowed to move over the road, around the corner, as long as it was still within the zone. I will just talk briefly about what's happened with gaming in Hamilton over the last 10 years, because there's been some discussion around the table around whether we have a true sinking lid policy or not. And in my view, we do. The policy doesn't allow for new venues to be established and hasn't done for quite some time. What it does allow for, and it's consistent with the Gambling Act, is that venues can relocate under certain circumstances. So since December 2006, Hamilton City had 39 venues and 570 machines. So we're 10 years on, we now actually have, there was some statistics put up on the previous slide that suggested we had 30 venues still. The actual up-to-date numbers now, we only have 28 venues operating in Hamilton now and 420 machines. There's recently been 2 more venues in the inner city closed, which is the Quadrant and the Sandbar. So over the last 10 years, the policy has been effective in terms of reducing the number of machines in Hamilton. So we've gone, like I say, from 39 venues now down to 28. So 11 venues have disappeared in the last 10 years and 150 machines. So the CBD has probably been affected mainly in the last 10 years in terms of the reduction of the number of machines. So we now only have 3 venues, class 4 venues operating in the CBD area, and obviously the casino. All other venues are operated in various different suburbs around Hamilton. We don't have any Class 4 venues that operate 24 hours. That right only exists for the casino, and those venues that operate Class 4 are restricted by the liquor licensing hours, which was pointed out in a previous slide. So in terms of the number of gaming machines in Hamilton, we don't have a problem. You know, we're at 2.4% of total venues nationally, Hamilton City has. The policy has been effective in the last 2 years. We've had a natural decline in venues of 11 venues in the last 10 years. That's roughly one venue a year, and 150 machines removed. So there are circumstances where venues need to move. Te Rapa Tavern was an example of that. We have another one in town now. The impact, I guess, on community funding is substantial. Some councillors may or may not be aware, but the government, or the minister, has recently released a discussion document around further reforms on the sector, and those reforms talk about the sustainability of the sector and the reduction in community funding, obviously, that has resulted in the natural reduction of the number of machines. So some of the concerns around that are how do we continue to make sure that the sector is sustainable and that it can continue to provide a safe environment and deliver grants to community groups in New Zealand. So there's a number of topics that are involved in that discussion document, but obviously there has been the trend that we've seen in Hamilton with the reduction in number of venues over the last 10 years is the same trend that we would see across the country, certainly with councils that have sinking lid policies. Another matter I'll just touch on is that we've talked a lot about problem gambling rates here. This actual document that the minister has released only a couple of weeks ago does have some up-to-date information around some problem gambling statistics. So the Ministry of Health conducted a national gambling survey in 2012, and it indicated approximately 0.7% of the adult population in New Zealand are problem gamblers. So that's 23,500 New Zealanders are problem gamblers. I don't have any information drilled down to how many problem gamblers we have in Hamilton, but that's a national total. And for the most recent results from 2013 indicate that it's actually reduced to 0.5%, and there's been no change in 2014.
Okay, so thank you. Now we're on to questions. Councillor Mallett and then Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Just some clarity on your figures first, Tim. Thank you for your submission. You said the venues dropped from 39 to 28?
Yes.
So that's a 28% reduction in venues?
Yes.
Okay. And the number of machines dropped from 578 to 428? Well, you said 150.
570 to 420.
I beg your pardon, got the 8 wrong. So that's a 26% reduction in machines. To what extent, and you may or may not know this, but to what extent does okay, clearly when the venues are closing, that answers one part of my question. To what extent do venues voluntarily surrender their machines, or they move and decide the gambling thing's just not for us, you know, they make a decision not to, like the Te Rapa Tavern?
Yes.
Do you get situations where a gambling venue moves but doesn't maintain its licence?
Only as a result of policy that wouldn't allow them to move their machines.
So they move out of a GPA?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So generally, once a venue has machines, it's unusual for it to surrender its machines, so to speak?
Correct.
Okay.
If you take the example just of the Quadrant in town, which was on the corner of Elmer and Victoria Street, the lease came to an end there, I believe.
Yep.
There's now Kiwi Bank there. That pub has closed. Those 14 machines that were in there are now gone. So the latest figures don't represent that, because there's still a 6-month window where that venue can reopen again in that same location.
Oh, okay. So the licence holders could still find another spot within a GPA and...
No, they can only re-establish it at that same address unless they can apply to relocate it somewhere else.
Oh, under the existing policy?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay. So there is, whether or not it's because of the policy or not, but there is certainly some form of sinking lid occur. Well, the number of machines and venues is dropping.
Yep. We have seen some
Actually, then
venues,
substantially too.
if we go back over the years, there has been some venues in Hamilton that have just removed their machines. And that's a combination of venues that don't want them anymore, and I'm talking maybe going back a few years now, and some venues where it just may not be viable for the Class 4 trust to operate in there. So there are those circumstances. Machinery costs a lot of money, it's a high-cost operation, so they are sometimes unviable. So, and obviously there's been a natural decline in terms of hospitality venues since the global financial crisis. We've seen a decline in the number of pubs that are operating and the number of pubs that are opening. So that has been part of the cause as well.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McPherson.
You were just being asked by Councillor Mallett about whether any venues... Sorry? No. Whether any venues had voluntarily given up their licences. It's certainly true that around the country quite a number have, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And they've for choices that they didn't want to have gambling on their premises in some cases.
Yeah, most of those situations would be to do with viability, the cost of operating in there.
But there are some, are there not, that have said gambling is not something we want in our community?
Yeah, look, I am aware of one, I think a few years ago out in Helensville, I think it was.
That was
removed
one,
machines.
yeah, that was the first of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
There were some others too.
So it is a choice by the person that owns the licensed establishment whether they want to have machines or not.
Yeah. That wasn't my main question though. You're talking about the numbers of machines having declined. In that same 10-year period, are you aware that the number of pokie machines, in many cases almost identical pokie machines, just owned by different people, in Hamilton Casino have gone up from, I think, just over 200 to 330?
Yes.
In the same period. So although Grassroots and the Hamilton City Council can't in this policy address that issue, we nevertheless as a council looking at the overall effect on the community need to take into account the whole picture, not just the picture that we can influence. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes and no. I understand what you're saying, but the policy only allows you to take into consideration or gives you powers around Class 4 gambling. So to disadvantage us by counting casino numbers, I think would be unreasonable.
Is that us disadvantaging you or the government disadvantaging you by having different laws for different types of pokie machine gambling?
Valid question. Yes.
Yeah. So the correct number of pokies in Hamilton at the moment is actually 750, isn't it?
Including casino?
Yeah,
I don't,
including the casino.
I'm not sure the exact number.
Well,
of the casino,
330 they say on their website.
Yeah, plus 420 operating at the moment in Class 4.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not blaming Grassroots for that situation, but it is something that we have to take into account as what, you know, and the availability of the casino, hours-wise, is greater than your clients.
Absolutely. The casino obviously operates under different legislation, uneven playing field, higher bet rates, higher return to player.
Less return to the community?
No, virtually, hardly any return to community. So it is an uneven playing field, and we are in an unfortunate situation where there's two sets of rules.
Yeah. When you were talking about the reduction in numbers over the years and saying that there was concern about the amount of support that was going to be available, especially in the future, back to the community, the government a few years ago, by regulation, I believe, changed the proportion, increased the proportion of a pokie machine's turnover that had to be returned to the community, didn't it?
Yes.
Can't remember the
37.12 increased to 40%.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's in effect now.
That's still 40% of the total takings from the machines. Could, I mean, your company, Grassroots, or I don't know, trust, I suppose it is.
Yes.
Could it bear a greater proportional return to the community?
Grassroots for the last 4 years has returned in excess of 42% to the community. So we exceed the minimum regularly.
Okay. Would you think that it would be a reasonable public expectation, say that half of the return of the takings of the machines went back to the community?
Yeah, the numbers just don't quite stack up because unfortunately there's a pie and that can only get cut up so many ways. There was a scheduled increase to go from 40 to 42 by 2017, but the minister's now cancelled that increase on the basis that we now have to pay DIA an extra 1% in fees. But just to clarify that
so
point,
you get 1% and they get 1%, but the community doesn't get any percent.
That's right, yeah. So the minimum distribution to the community is 40. Most trusts are exceeding that. We have to pay the government a 23% duty. We pay the venue operator, the publican who operates the machines, no more than 16%. And then the balance, which is roughly about 16%, we have to run the operation on. So buy the machines, set the operation up and actually run it. So it's run very lean. There's not a lot of room in terms of from a cost point of view. So we try and maximise every cent we can to the community.
Sure. Look, the last year I want to talk about just you're proposing or wanting us to have, or Class 4 gambling venues to have the automatic right for relocation within one of the gambling permitted areas. Automatic or by application? How would you feel if the regulation said Class 4 venues may apply and give reasons, and it's up to the council to approve or not? That's sort of something that was less than automatic.
Yeah, look, by right would be great, but I think if there was a criteria that if a venue wanted to relocate and there was a criteria that they had to meet, and if they met that criteria, they could relocate.
You'd be asking for a transparent criteria up front, not a subjective decision.
That's right, absolutely. So, you know, the example I gave earlier where we have a venue in the CBD now has a demolition clause on the building. We're now in discussions with them around moving their premise, but we can't at the moment. So that I think would be a legitimate reason to be able to relocate. Their lease is coming to an end. They want to re-establish their business as a bar, very close to where the existing one is. So, yeah, those sorts of circumstances, natural disasters, there'd be a range of reasons why a venue should be allowed to relocate.
Thanks. Thank you.
Could I just ask staff on Councillor McPherson's question there? Is there anything stopping council in having in the policy, if the relocation clause goes through, that has following on from his questions around that it could be at the discretion of council? Is there anything in the law stopping us from doing that?
Sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well, we've consulted on either no ability to do it or automatic ability. Something that fell between that would seem to be legitimate. If it was outside, further away from them, maybe not.
I think it's, I mean, obviously, we are in submission process and you're going to go away and analyse everything, but I'm hoping that you're picking up on some of the things that elected members are saying that to be included in that report and come back with some of that information. We'll round it all up at the end, but yeah, thank you. Okay, are there any further? Oh, Councillor Gallagher.
Just going to your submissions, and you got the your 8 venues, and you say that the grant total, do I take it from those 8 venues, was $4.3 million?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So that would mean that those venues will generate in total revenue of about $10 million. Is that roughly over a year? Because obviously I'm doing your 43%. Have I got that right?
Yep, roughly. Yep, 42% return to the community.
Can you just go to help me? Just make me down with the other percentages where they go. Obviously, there's
Right.
the
Okay.
levy.
Yep. So we have a minimum 40% return to community.
Yep.
We have 23% we pay in gaming duty, which goes to the government.
Yep.
1.5% in a problem gambling levy. It's to
Yep.
fund the providers to provide treatment services.
Yeah.
3.7% to Department of Internal Affairs and fees.
Running the government on it.
The publican who hosts the machines can be reimbursed up to 16%.
16%.
Yep.
All right,
And then roughly leaves about 16% to run the society, the trust on.
So
There-
publican reimbursement out of 10 million be $1.6 million.
And to publican
Yeah.
and venue payment.
If you look at,
yes.
if you look at it, I'm working at a rough bit from those venues, and I'm not going to split them because that'll be overs and unders. So there's just over $10 million generated from
Yes.
those sites,
Yes.
roughly.
Yep.
$4.3 million in community.
Yes.
And then $1.6 million to the public and then other. Okay.
Yep. It is a high-cost operation
Yeah,
for a
sure.
publican to run as well, in terms of, certainly from a harm-in point of view now, most rooms have some dedicated staff in there.
Okay.
The other thing that these are GST exclusive costs, so we also pay the government GST first. So these are the costs that are allocated after GST is taken off.
So just be clear that, so if you put $1 in the machine,
Yes,
15 cents goes to the government, does it?
yes.
For GST?
GST.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You do the
So government's essentially getting about 35%
Yeah.
roughly,
I didn't realise that was
30
spent.
in reality. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
plus their DIA fees, plus the problem gambling levy.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Is the income from poker machines falling?
It's stabilised in the last couple of years. It has been falling, but it has stabilised.
How much has it fallen by?
It's fallen by so at its peak in 2003, 2004, we're over $1 billion, and we're now roughly at about just over 800 million. Bear in mind, the total number of machines is reduced from about 23,000 at its peak in 2005. We're roughly operating around 16,000 machines nationally now. So we've had a massive reduction nationally in terms of machines.
So why do you suggest we've got this fall? We're losing, there's a $200 million fall in income in the last roughly 10 years.
Yes.
Why is the fall in income?
Mainly due to a reduction in machine numbers.
So it's opportunity. If the opportunity's there, people put their money in. If the opportunity's not there, they won't go looking for it.
Yep, but the reduction hasn't been relative to the number of machines that has been reduced out of the market. I would make that point.
So you commented earlier on that we don't have a problem in Hamilton with the amount of machines. Is that a personal opinion or is that a fact? Is that is that grassroots opinion?
Absolutely. Comparative in terms of the national averages, percentage of machines out of the national total per TLA, we represent about 2.4% nationally. And I think based on the reduction we've seen in the last 10 years, we don't have an issue with oversupply of machines in Hamilton. We have an issue with the numbers continuing to decline and of an ability not to replace those.
So we just talked about the fact that the number of machines falling had contributed to the $200 million loss in income over the last 10 years.
Yes.
And you're saying that we don't have a problem in Hamilton with the amount of machines. Well, it depends what perspective you look at it, surely. You're obviously looking for as much money through Hamilton's poker machines as possible. There are other people out there who are trying to minimise that by keeping a sinking lid policy to continue to reduce the number of machines.
Yep, and we have a sinking lid policy in Hamilton now.
And that's, so when you said we don't have a problem in Hamilton with the amount of machines, that's grassroots opinion, that's not a fact, is it?
My point I was making was we don't have an issue with too many machines or an oversupply of machines in Hamilton.
You also said that it's common sense to move from location, to allow moving machines from location to location. That's common sense for grassroots. That's not necessarily common sense for people who are concerned about gambling.
One part of the existing policy allows venues to relocate to within the zone from outside of the zone, but if you're already in the zone, you can't move across the road. My point is common sense would suggest that when the policy was drafted, that was either an error or just missed out, but it would make sense that if a venue's within the zone, it can move within the zone. If you're allowed to move venues from out of the zone into the zone.
So what we're looking at today is weakening further the sinking lid policy that we have.
I don't believe so when you look at the trend and the decline in numbers in Hamilton in the last 10 years. I think the sinking lid policy has been more than effective.
So there are people who believe that it's not common sense to move from location to location because it's weakening the sinking lid policy that we have.
Look, there may be some people believe that, absolutely. It's certainly not the view of grassroots.
Yeah, so it's your view that it's common sense to be allowed to move from location to location.
Yes.
Do you agree with some of the earlier submitters that there is harm with the percentage of the money put through poker machines?
Absolutely.
What percentage would grassroots say that harm was? Earlier submitters said it was up to 60%. What does your research show?
All I have is the information that the Department of Internal Affairs have released, which is a study conducted by the Ministry of Health, which suggests that it's currently down to 0.5% of the adult population in New Zealand.
No, the percentage of money that goes through your machines.
Yes.
What do you believe what does your research show as harm? We've been told 60% by other experts today. What do you believe is the percentage of harm?
I couldn't take a guess on that. All I have is statistics that have been released by the Ministry of Health. We don't have. I've never heard the 60% percentage quoted before. I've certainly never seen any data around that. All we really have is, in terms of substantial data, is national data based on total people that have presented themselves in terms of gambling-related harm.
So you do agree then? You do agree that there is harm from some of the money that goes through your machines?
Absolutely.
So is your justification, is grassroots justification for the harm, that for some of the money that goes through your machine, that it's for a greater good for the $4.3 million that you put back into the community, and that you see that as a greater good than the harm done by families going hungry, families being broken, children being hungry? You see the greater good as the $4.3 million you distribute?
Certainly we do a lot of good work in the community, absolutely. We have mechanisms in place to manage the harm at all our venues and try and reduce that and ensure that we identify people very early on and make sure that...
But what I asked was, do you believe that the greater good is the $4.3 million that you distribute, that's a greater good over the harm that you do?
I think if you weighed up the two, I believe that the good that's generated for the community on a percentage basis probably does outweigh the harm.
And it's grassroots opinion?
I'm not sure what grassroots opinion would be on that, but that's my view.
It's your personal opinion?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we've exhausted those questions from you. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. Right, we have one last submitter, Mr. Edwin Mercer. And this is submission number 8, and it's on page 28. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm here representing the harmed portion of Class 4 gambling machines. I've been personally harmed, and having got a look inside the room, I now know more than I want to about this industry, its effects on people, both personally and the many, many people I've spoken to that have either a gambling problem or been affected by Class 4 gambling. So I think there's been a lot of talk about statistics. I can assure you that behind those statistics are people. Okay, 1.3 0.3 to 1.7% of the people are problem gamblers. That number represents thousands of affected people harmed. The topic, though, today is the relocation of venues. The aims of the council policy are to control the growth of Class 4 gambling venues, I believe, and to minimise the harm. I defined growth not just in numbers. I'll give you a simple gardening analogy if I can. If I'm growing plants in the garden and they don't flourish, they don't grow, I move them. I don't move my weeds. That's simply how I see it. I would say to the council that businesses relocate for many, many reasons. Very few businesses relocate to make their financial situation worse. And in fact, I would challenge you that a business that invests multi-millions of dollars and wants to take its Class 4 gambling machines on the basis that that's going to justify the move, I would say that their primary activity is not really selling alcohol and food. So I'd ask that the councillors have the courage to recognise the harm that the Class 4 gambling machines do, not only in Hamilton, but right throughout this country. You need a sinking lid. There is a dark side to this industry. It's not just the affected people. There is an awful lot of crime associated with the running of the trusts, people involved with them. I could talk for hours on it. Like I said, I have seen and learnt more than I really want to know. So that, in essence, is my comments.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Mallett for question.
Thanks, Edwin. At the start, you said you'd looked inside the room. What do you mean by that?
I have.
Is that being in here?
No, sorry.
Oh.
The room I'm referring to is the world of problem gambling, Department of Internal Affairs, crime, violence, suicide. I believe there was a question earlier about the harm done by gambling. That's one of the outcomes, depression. It's a terrible burden on our society.
So, Edwin, looking inside the room is a very gross
that's right. Yes, by exposure
abstraction. So what's your experience with these things?
Sorry, I have family members who are affected by problem gambling, are problem gamblers. I have subsequently spoken to many people who are affected by Class 4 gambling machines. I have met and talked to people about what their motivation is behind this, behind their gambling, behind their problem, whether they believe the controls are effective, the current controls. Overwhelmingly, they say no. So that's my exposure to
Okay, so with all due respect, and I appreciate it must be painful if you've got family members who are involved, but...
family, friends, colleagues, business associates.
Who do you hang around with?
Sorry?
Who do you hang around with?
Members of society, and I bet there are a heap of people in this room too that are affected, and if they don't know it... Okay.
Would it be correct to, without being disrespectful, to say yours is anecdotal evidence?
No, only in that I've seen the damage. I've spoken to the people. They've been very candid with me, and I guess I'm lucky, and that's why I'm here today. It's for them, it's not for me.
And you're absolutely right. That's your total right to be here and giving your evidence. You did say something that suggested that it's growing, but we've had independent evidence from government authorities, if you can trust them, no, you can't, can you, Dave? That machines, venues and revenue are dropping. So I think I got from your evidence that you thought that things were things were increasing.
No, not at all. Nationally, you're quite correct. The number of machines is dropping. The amount of revenue from gambling is dropping. And I think that is probably a recognition of the harm that's been caused. It's no longer socially acceptable, or it's becoming less socially acceptable. I remember the days when cigarette companies sponsored sport.
Yep, I can remember that too. Yep. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thanks. Edwin, you mentioned criminal activity. Are you saying that there is criminal activity in Hamilton?
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't got any personal dealings with crime in Hamilton as a result, only what I have seen published.
So I'm a bit concerned about that because apart from maybe reading in the paper that someone's been in court because they've taken money from an employer, yes, that's a criminal activity. If you think there is criminal activity in the gaming sector, why wouldn't you report that to the police?
I have.
You have reported it?
Yes.
And they've taken...
Sorry, not to the police, to the Internal Affairs Department.
Which is the proper place.
Are you able to describe, without naming names, what that criminal activity is?
There are, there's a wide range of criminal activity. It's not just problem gamblers who are the criminals to obtain funds to continue their gambling. There's numerous examples of people who are in positions within sporting organisations who have been convicted of fraudulent activities. And what they were trying to do, I believe, is to promote their organisations but making fraudulent claims.
And that has happened in Hamilton then?
I'm not aware of it happening in Hamilton, but I'm certainly aware of it happening in my community.
Right, are there any further questions? Councillor King.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Mr Mercer, for your courage for coming here today and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's too many harmed people out there who can't or won't step forward.
That wasn't a question for Councillor King, but thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. So that's the last of our submitters. Now, lunch is waiting for us in the tea room. So just a couple of things to wrap that up. Sean's going to has got some information he can go over us about the process to date and how we've arrived at today. So he'll give and that's at your request, Councillor King. And then
You're having that lunch, eh, Sean?
Staff will bring back information and analysis of the submissions and the deliberations report. Now, when we get to it, I'm not sure how the committee feels. I think that should just go to council rather than to the Strategy and Policy Committee, but I'll propose that when we get to it. So, and then I've got a couple of other notes for staff to capture, and if there's anything else the committee wants some information for staff to bring back or included in that report, we'll go through that list as well. So Sean, your information first, please.
Can I just ask a question, Angela? Sorry, there's a bunch of maps associated with this, and I can't see one that looks like it's got 5 crossroads in it. I might be misreading the...
It doesn't.
Yeah, no, they're...
Out of the area.
Yeah.
Oh, so that one there is out of the area, is it?
Established before.
Yeah.
Brought in the new.
Oh,
So it's like
so
that, what do they call it, grandfather clause? Yeah.
Oh, okay, so the one next to the
Yeah.
Burger Fuel or whatever
Yeah.
is
Yes.
out, and so
Outside
that
of
one,
the current
if that one
area.
closes, that's sinking lid.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so
That
Sean,
clarifies that for me.
No, it could move within a.
within a
Oh, I could
permitted,
move
if
into...
the relocation
I
clause
could move
goes
into the
yeah.
ACE area, thank you.
So we'll just hear how we've arrived today,
Okay.
because yes, it has been a long journey.
Because I spent...
Yeah, so it goes back to, so in August 2015, Council adopted the statement of proposal. So that included the Class 4 gambling venue policy with options A and B. It then went to public consultation on those, and in November had the hearings and deliberations for those. And so the Strategy and Policy Committee voted to support option B, and then as a result of discussion at that meeting, decided that it wanted to consult the public on the additional clauses and to bring that back to a future strategy and policy meeting. So in that November meeting, those supporting that motion to back option B were Her Worship the Mayor, Councillors Green, Pascoe, Chesterman, Mallet, Tooman and O'Leary, and against were King, Gallagher, Young and McPherson.
And sorry, that was, we went out and consulted on the amendments because that was the legal advice the committee was given
So
to do.
correct.
We had to do
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yep. So there was legal advice at that meeting.
Yeah.
That's right, it was suggested that
Yeah.
it wasn't
That they were
sufficient to just
significant
get-
enough
So
to
It had
have
to go back again.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the option A and option B were
Yeah.
essentially around whether you could relocate from outside to within inside,
Yeah.
But the additional clauses were around what we're discussing today about whether you could relocate from within an area to another location within the area.
Yeah.
That then went to the February Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, and you might recall that there was a tied vote, essentially. So the committee were voting on whether to adopt the policy with option B. That was tied, and there was an amendment to refer that to the March Strategy and Policy Committee, which was also tied. Then there was a procedural motion to refer the whole matter to council. That was passed, and those for that motion to refer it to council were Councillors King, Gallagher, Green, Wilson, Young, Mallet, O'Leary and McPherson. Those against were Her Worship the Mayor, Councillors Forsyth, Chesterman and Tooman. Then the matter came to the April council meeting. At that meeting, council voted to adopt the Class 4 policy with option B and to go to public consultation on the additional clause. So at that April meeting, that motion was passed. Those for that were Her Worship the Mayor, Councillors Forsyth, Pascoe, Chesterman, Tooman and O'Leary, and against were Councillors King, Gallagher, Young and McPherson. And that's the path to here.
Great, thank you. Okay, so councillors, I've noted down here, I thought Councillor McPherson raised a possible idea that flicked in my mind if we end up with a relocation. So a clause in there, and that was around the possibility of whether applications could be discretionary to council. So I'm hoping staff are noting that one because I'd like some information on that. The second one that I've noted myself is that could we restrict any relocation clause to just clubs? So I'd like some information on that, given that actually clubs are treated differently under the legislation. Councillors, is there other information that you would like to ensure that comes back in that deliberations report?
Can I ask a question of the GM?
Yeah.
So it's fair to say that this council to date, in the last 3 years, has a reputation for bringing in a more permissive relocation policy and a less stringent sinking lid policy. Is that correct?
So by adopting the policy with option B, that is a more permissive policy than we had previously.
At one stage, there was a split vote in this chamber over that.
Well,
Yep. So
yep.
that's correct.
there's twice that I didn't use my casting vote.
So it's been a very
It's been a good
it's been a very close debate.
Yeah.
All the way through.
It has.
But loosening up the policy is what's won in the end up to date. Is that correct?
Yes, so the policy we have now is more permissive than the policy we had previously.
Thank you.
So, councillors, that my question remains, is there anything else that you want to ensure after having listened to submitters today that you would like more information on or that you want included in that deliberations report other than the two things that I've raised, and I'm assuming staff have been noting stuff anyway? Is there anything else that comes to mind? I mean, you can email the General Manager later, it doesn't have to be now.
Sorry, it's about the process.
Yeah.
I'm a bit concerned that we would refer just minutes of today straight to council. Is that what you were saying?
Oh, no, sorry.
Are we making a recommendation, this group?
No, because
Okay,
we're
so
just
I'm a
in
bit
hearings.
concerned that it's going to go to a group of people who haven't heard the evidence.
Oh, no, well, it's not. I just, and on page 5,
Yeah.
the recommendation there says that it was going to, that the deliberations report will come to the 30th of August strategy and policy. I'm not dying in a ditch over it. I just thought.
No, I'm even concerned that we're not dealing with that today, with this group. Because,
dealing with what?
Not, yeah.
yeah, I mean, normally the same group that hears evidence on an item issue makes a recommendation to council. Fair enough.
So this
council,
can be,
yeah. But we're talking about a whole lot of people. You know, they might be at the Tour de France or the Mayor and Councillor
Well,
Pascoe. I'm not
yeah.
sure where they are,
Yeah.
but they haven't heard what we've heard today.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's the process that we're always dealing with.
Well, it's not what we've had, but in the past, Madam Chair.
We've
sorry.
split, I mean, I'm just going on standing orders. This is the hearings and submission process. You're asking if we should be deliberating today
Well, this is a formal meeting
Yeah.
of the Strategy and Policy Committee, is it not? The agenda says it is.
Yeah, but this report is just the hearings and the submitters. Normally, I would say 95% of the time, we split here, maybe, I may be wrong, might be 100%, we split hearings and then we have deliberations and adoption and analysis at a later meeting.
That's not
we've
how
always done it.
this particular policy has been dealt with in previous occasions, but prior to this council anyway. When it was first dealt with, those who turned
Well,
up made the decision.
I'm just going on the process to date. That first hearing.
If I may, I mean, it's
Yeah.
similar to the process for, say, the Founders Theatre, where we had the hearings and then the deliberation
Comes
will be
later.
separate. So we have done it both ways.
Yeah.
Would we have to?
Well, where was the decision made to not have it today? Where was that decided by
We're just
council?
following normal
To not have
normal
the-
process.
not-
Deliberations today.
Not to make a decision?
It was in the report, Chair, item 3.
Yeah, okay, so thanks. Did the council provide that report, or did staff suggest that without a discussion by council?
So that was the staff recommendation.
Just
Okay,
following.
so I don't have a problem that the staff have recommended that, but I think we, as a committee, should be deciding when the deliberations are, should we not? Not staff.
Have we
I mean,
ever
they have
done
no
that,
problems with
though?
staff making the recommendation.
I don't know that committees ever decide. We've normally had, I mean, in my 3 years as chair, we've had hearings as a separate process and then deliberations and adoption. And often deliberations and then adoption later, depending on, I guess, how many changes.
Well, it can
Staff.
depend on
So I'm-
logistical things like time and that, but this time we have time to make a decision, I would have thought, because it's a one point
Yeah.
when it's not a whole open policy.
So, okay, so are we understanding, or actually, let's stop for lunch and then come back to that, because I think,
Yeah, I will, but
I mean, we haven't advertised that or anything. So let's stop for lunch, because lunch is waiting, it's been out there half an hour. We'll come back at 12:40.
12:40.
Yeah.
No, is your point that